On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. To discover the best in events and performances, visit blumenthalarts.org.
Those guys were my guys. Those guys were my bosses. Mm-hmm. And they would tell stories. And I'm here to tell you that the stories in Mad Men, absent all of the soap opera stuff, I don't know who slept with who. I'm just saying, I'm going to own that right now. All the stories about the client stuff, they're all true. Now, I'm sure they were exaggerated for dramatic entertainment and clarity, but that Lucky Strike story that opens in the show in the pilot, true story. It actually happened just the way they depicted it, because it was still a legend when I was there, because Pete Campbell and the Pete Campbell ilk were my bosses. So when I came in, it was the sunsetting of the real Mad Men era.
Charlie Elberson excavates and clarifies the meaning of brands. He is a brand strategist who has developed, built, and stewarded brands for business clients for over 35 years. His title is Vice President Insights Strategist for Wray Ward Creative Marketing Communications. His work includes asking the questions that lead to insight. He is the primary trustee and advisor for Reemprise, a venture philanthropy fund that seeks community impacts of unforeseen proportions. Charlie also sings and plays keyboard for Small Time Joe, a classic rock, blues, and soul cover band. In this episode, we hear Charlie's thoughts about the power of insight, the essence of branding, and the quality most important for a life well lived. Charlie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. It is great to be here with you today.
It is great to have you. Your title with Wray Ward is Insights Strategist. What is an insight strategist?
It's a great title, right? I'm kind of sort of trying to figure it out myself. The Insights Strategist title formed itself around a role, more so than we wrote the title and then tried to fill the role. And the role emerged from my history in the advertising industry, which goes more than 35 years now. The nature of that arc has shown me that the power of insights to nurture, feed, and give birth to ideas is immeasurable. It's indescribable. It's invaluable. It's almost impossible to have a powerful idea without insight. However, insights are everywhere. They're all over the place, and picking the right insight, applying the right insight, sifting, and finding the insight that's going to stimulate the idea and give it its power is not a simple process.
How is an insight different than an idea?
An insight is always a fact or an observation. An insight is just an aspect of reality. It may include to some degree a matter of perspective. If you look at reality a certain way, you will see an insight more clearly. A lot of that is true of human behavior. If you look at human behavior a certain way, you will see a certain reality. If you look at how people behave, look at how they eat breakfast. Their breakfast patterns will reveal a lot about how they view their lives and how they treat their bodies and themselves and their family, and reveal a lot about their cultural backgrounds. And so much comes from just observing how they eat breakfast, when and where and with whom and what they eat, and how they make their choices. All of those things give perspective, and they're all insights.
It sounds like the work of anthropology.
It is so anthropological, it's not funny. Because you're really looking in the insights where you're looking for patterns. And a lot of times when clients and people ask me about, well, strategy, what is strategy? And my answer is examine patterns and see what has to shift in a pattern that would lead to a whatever the goal is.
So a client engages you as an insights strategist.
Correct.
How do you go about the work?
I go about the work much like, as you said, an anthropologist would. The first thing I have to figure out with a client is what problem are they trying to solve? What are they trying to achieve? What is their goal? And sometimes they have a hard time, clients do, of articulating exactly what it is they want to accomplish. So sometimes the first part of my work is just doing that clarifying conversation. There's a little bit of therapy involved sometimes in terms of what is their human need, what is their organizational need, clarifying that in a way that we can then focus our energies. Because then it becomes a process, and the process is very much hunting and gathering. I will try and go into their world. And at Wray Ward, where I work, the agency's organizational scheme for gathering insights is a method we call 5 C's. The C's are climate, category, customer, competition, and company. How handy, it's all C's. And the climate is just the environment that the company is operating in, the general economy, the whatever the overall air and weather of their business might be. Category is fairly self-explanatory in terms of what is their category and how is it moving. The customer C is almost always the biggest because that's where the really juicy parts are. Understanding customers, what motivates them, what's their mindset, why do they make their choices, what can we do to affect their choices. The better we understand that, of course, the better we can do our work. Competition, always important. Competition isn't always what people think it is. Competition for a client may or may not be the direct competitor that's transactional. It might be an influence or a counter-influence. It might be an obstacle that keeps a customer from doing what we want. And then the last thing is the company, which is simply the sort of strengths, the strengths and weaknesses, the barriers.
Charlie, what makes you good at it?
Okay, what makes me good at it? I have insatiable curiosity. I'm the elephant's child, and I have no end of my curiosity into the intricacies of anything. My primary motivation in life is not to be bored. Somebody said, why did you get into advertising? You could have had this career or that career. I thought it would be the least boring. And that was it. That's as deep as I thought. It's proven to be very, very effective at that. It has its problems, but boredom is not one of them.
What problems does it have?
Well, the problems that it has is we have to run a business. There's always business problems, and those aren't always all that interesting. We have the problem that every company does where, like they say, that when 90% of your assets ride the elevator at the end of the day, that's both an opportunity and a challenge.
You mean people?
I do mean people.
What do you like best about the work?
I think what I like best about the work is that there's a science to it in the same way that there's a science to economics in terms of you can examine a situation and see what caused it. So you can see a cause and effect. It's very good in terms of being analytical, not so much of being predictive, but you can analyze and see a very logical procession of a journey for a customer of this and then this and then this. That's one thing. The other thing I really like about it is I get to experience the power of creativity firsthand. I get to participate with other people and collaborate in the creative process. So I have the left brain and the right brain both activated and working and contributing. Part of why I like it is because it is so intuitive. That's the art of this particular science, is using intuition to see where the seeds are pointing and converging, and then finding that point of convergence. And where the insights converge is almost always where an idea lives. Then you get to try and find out what that idea is. That's the creative process.
Can creative work be good if the marketplace doesn't accept it?
There's a difference between marketplace acceptance and marketplace success. The marketplace may not necessarily accept an idea for it to work. It must resonate. It may disturb. It may even aggravate for an idea to work, but it must ultimately resonate. It must ultimately ring true to an audience for it to work. One of the most powerful things that happens in marketing is to understand where people's anxieties are. And when we understand what their anxieties are, those are so powerful and so motivating. I know my mentor told me that a person will do some things for virtue, exert some amount of effort in order to be virtuous, but they will do anything to alleviate anxiety. I will do anything to get out of that. So when you understand where people's anxiety is and go stand there with them, it's not necessarily comfortable, but it does resonate. You say, oh, they get me. And once they get me, then they're ready to hear about what a possible different pattern or a different solution might be, even if it means changing their own belief sets or even changing their own patterns. This is really deep stuff, and it's very different from the kind of gimmickry that a lot of people associate with advertising, but that's why you need insights, because otherwise it can just be gimmicks.
Do you work with a psychology department?
Well, no, I work with therapists frequently, but that's personally, so I hope it helps. We'll see as time bears me out. No, we use a lot of psychology, of course, and we tap into a lot of what's called behavioral economics. That's more the science that's most closely aligned with what I do.
Charlie, what is a brand?
Wow. That's a fun question. Volumes have been written and sold on what is a brand. Well, to me, a brand is always a relationship. It's a very short answer to a very long question. A very meaningful question, because what is the relationship between an entity and a brand? What's the relationship between your iPad and you? Well, your relationship with your iPad isn't a relationship with the brand, but it is, because the iPad and what it does for you and what it succeeds and fails at, you relate to the brand. You put that on Apple. When you go into the Apple store and you have an experience, you put that on the brand. A brand is an assembly of associations that people have. What we try and do is make sure those associations are leading to something that we believe will help contribute to a client's ultimate goals, which usually involved elevating their brand, improving their business, improving their relationship with you in ways that can ultimately be fiscally measured. But that's always ultimately. The money is the last thing to show up in a brand. And when people expect, I'm going to engage in some brand building, so we're going to make a lot of money this quarter, it doesn't work that way any more than a relationship does. If you invest and foster a relationship, it's because you want long-term returns. No valid relationship pays off this afternoon.
I've heard someone once say that a brand is a promise. Would you agree?
A brand entails a promise. For a brand to succeed, it must consistently deliver on a promise that whoever's receiving the promise finds meaningful. So it can be, it's simple to say a brand is a promise. A brand entails that promise, and that promise must be consistently delivered, or the brand goes away.
What companies do you think have done a good job recently establishing a brand?
I'll give you one that's kind of off the wall. I really like, I really like the Dollar Shave Club. Okay, have you heard of the Dollar? The Dollar.
I have.
Okay, sure, of course. And the Dollar Shave Club I like because they understand the proposition, they understand the premise from which they're operating, and how it leads to a promise that they then must consistently fulfill. And the premise upon which they're operating is that you and I are paying too much to shave our faces. And Gillette wouldn't have it any other way. So to compete with Gillette, particularly if you are an unknown and coming completely out of the radical somewhere ether, you better have a promise that I can frame up with what I'm doing right now, which is spending far too much money with Gillette to make my face not as scruffy. So the way they do that is by creating this promise that says, paying more than $1 for this, don't you think that's really more than you ought to be doing? And then they do it with such attitude and character. They create this personality around it, again, because they're doing that antithetically to Gillette, which has no personality. They say, we're going to create a personality. It's going to be a personality that you guys can appreciate and you're going to really resonate with, because it's kind of a radical, kind of a wild personality, kind of a little bit of kind of some scrappiness going on there, and all you guys are going to like us better than them, and we do, whether we are subscribers or not. I'm not a subscriber. I like them better than the brands that spend a lot more money than they do.
And of course, subscription or membership inherently is a relationship.
Of course it is. And what's really fascinating is they took their greatest weakness and turned it into a strength. And their greatest weakness is they have not and probably never will have any meaningful retail distribution, because Gillette owns all the means of distribution. So they had to find an alternative means of distribution that would not let them be in our face on a shelf. But what they knew that Gillette didn't know is I actually don't like to do that. I don't like going to the drugstore just to get some stupid razor blades. Go out of my way and park and go in, and they got to unlock the case, and you got to go find somebody. So you study the anthropological situation. You go, okay, well, we're actually doing Mark and Charlie a big favor by creating this relationship and changing it in ways that their competition, which is so much bigger, can't even conceive of. So they bought them.
Is there any branding work you've chosen not to do?
Yeah, of course. I've never gotten involved with marketing of politicians or politics, not because I don't understand it. I understand it really, really well. But it's very hard to do and succeed at as a business, although some people do that. When you start down that path, you're pretty much locked into this. I've never done politics. I can't say I've never done liquor or cigarettes because I've been around a long time. And if you've been around a long time, chances are you've done liquor or cigarettes. It's been more of a case where I've chosen not to deal with people that were not right. And, the nice thing about being in the agency world is that if you want to be a ethical business person, you have that opportunity. We get a bad rap because we're in advertising. Most advertising people I know are really good people. They're really smart and they're really creative and they really give a lot.
Is there a myth about advertising that we can take this opportunity to debunk?
Well, yeah, I'll just put it very simply. Most of the ads that you hate were not created by agencies. They were created by salespeople that needed to sell something. They were looking for the fastest, most expeditious way to do that their client would buy. A lot of the really bad ads that you don't like are bought by unsophisticated clients that are just trying to make some noise. And I don't really care what the noise is. And I don't really care if you like it. They don't really care if there's a promise. They don't really care if there's a value proposition or if you get any value out of it at all. Most advertisers know a little bit more than that to say that we really want to give the viewer some sort of a reward for at least giving us the little space in their heads or a little bit of their time.
There's a lot of talk about personal brands, taking the language of marketing and applying it to people.
It's an old idea.
Positioning people as products in the marketplace, right down to elevator pitches and our own personal mantras. Do you think of personal brands or branding people as a good thing?
I think it's kind of a construct for an idea that's as old as time. Individuals since forever have been conscious and paying attention to their reputation. My personal brand is synonymous with my reputation. I can go all over town and pretend to be something, but if the more you know me, I don't pay that out, and my reputation contradicts what I say that I am, then I have no brand equity as a personal brand. So a brand is synonymous with reputation. People have always had reputations. People have always really done a lot to protect them and to make sure that their behavior is consistent with their reputation. So if you think about personal branding as a way to magnify or elevate one's reputation, I think that's a valid exercise. But it has to start with some really inner truths. It has to start with, why do I do the things I do? What is my purpose? Why am I here? Why do I choose the choices I make and the relationships that I have? If a branding exercise helps an individual do that in the same way it helps companies do that, then it's a very valuable and valid exercise. And I know that when people go through personal branding exercise, there's a lot of self-discovery. The other aspect that shows up in personal branding that has shown up in corporate and institutional branding is the need to focus and articulate. It forces an individual to really think very clearly about their purpose, about why they make the choices they make, about how they represent truth for them, and then articulate it tightly, which is tough. It's really hard. Personal branding, like institutional branding, has to start with a truth. If it doesn't start with a truth, it can't sustain. If a client comes to me and says, I want to sell more screws, I'm going to say, well, tell me about your screws. Tell me about your company. Tell me about where they came from. Tell me about the people who make them. I want to hear about the truths within what's in the screw. What is the truth behind the screws that you're making? And they may very well say, well, I don't really want to talk about that. I want to make people buy more of them. I mean, of course you do. But similar with a personal brand, I want to know the truth about you. so that we can focus and really hone in on what is unique and powerful about you.
Well, let's talk about the truth of you, Charlie.
Oh, I teed that up.
Where did you grow up, and what was your childhood like?
I grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I grew up in a Leave It to Beaver house, which is an archaic reference, meaning a suburban split-level home on a quiet street where I could ride my bike to school, which I did. I had a really interesting path. My father was an executive with what was then a textile company. My mom was an ex-art teacher who was a homemaker. I have an older sister. And we did what people did. You went to school, went out in the yard and played. You took piano lessons and tried to get out of them. And you sat at home, came home for dinner when mom yelled at you and all that Leave It to Beaver stuff. One of the most formulative parts of my growing up period actually has to do with my education. My dad was extraordinarily well educated. He went to Choate, Princeton, and Harvard in order. And those are, well, name brands. And he really wanted his kids to get a good education. And we started, and it was fascinating because I drifted between very public schools and very private schools. I started out in public schools, and this will reveal the times and place I grew up in. I started out in public schools until they become integrated. And then the choice was made that perhaps I needed to be in private schools. This was not unusual. So at fourth grade, I moved to the private school, where I got an excellent education, and then went from that to Andover, which is a pretty exclusive private school.
Yet another brand.
The Bushes, the Kennedys, people go there. And I met and encountered teachers the like of which I have never, nor will I ever see their quality again. But I also encountered some really high-quality pharmaceutical products, because it was the 70s and these were teenagers we're talking about here, which was not my thing. Who am I to judge? But it wasn't really what I was into. Plus, there was trouble at home, and I really felt the need to come back home. So I did. So I went to Andover for a year, and then I came back home and went to the very public high school, which was the busing high school. It was the biggest high school in town, and it's where everybody got bussed into. Well, what's fascinating is that when I went to Andover, my roommate was, I don't know if we used the word gay back then yet, but he was a gay black guy, and I'm neither gay nor black. So and he and I were really good friends, so I was into inclusivity before it even had a word, but he was also extraordinarily smart, and I mean, he was way off the charts in every measure you want to apply. So it really wasn't very diverse. It was diverse in complexion and gender and sexuality only. However, when I went back home to my high school, there was everyone. Takes all kinds. They were all there.
How would your friends have described you back then? Who was Charlie Elberson in high school?
I'd say they'd think I was funny. They'd probably say it's really fascinating that when people describe me from my past, the phrase sunny disposition keeps showing up, which I love. I mean, it's great. Who don't want to have a sunny disposition? But I also have a really wicked sense of humor. So when the voice inside me hears that, the little wicked sense of humor kicks in and goes, oh, I'll show him sunny. So it's a pretty fascinating dichotomy goes on. So they like my sense of humor, and they like that I'm a positive person. And I really, really put a lot of emphasis in getting along with a lot of different kinds of people.
Would your high school version of yourself recognize you today?
Yeah, I think he would. He'd wonder why I shaved my beard off, which some people still do. He'd find my hair was really too short. My hair was long and I had a beard as early as I could possibly grow it, and because that was the times. And he would recognize what's inside me and what's motivating me. It's the same thing.
Charlie, you referenced your dad. Your father was a very accomplished executive. What work did he do?
My dad started as the office manager out of Harvard Business School. He had an MBA when they were first figuring out how to spell it. And he was started as the office manager at the Haynes Hosiery Company. There were two Haynes then. There was a hosiery and a knitwear, two brothers. One brother owned the hosiery, another brother owned the knitwear. So my dad, and his name was Bob, he died in 2013. So Bob went to work as the office manager, and over the years, he gradually moved up through the ranks and became president of the Haynes Hosiery Company. And I think his claim to fame was legs pantyhose.
Well, we're about to get there
Okay.
because that is one of the great product development stories. But as you think of your dad when you were young, what comes to mind when you think about your parents during those days growing up?
When I was growing up, it was my dad was not home a lot. When he was home, there was a lot of activities involving beef, apparently. I don't know where he found these steaks, but they were like 3 inches thick. And so my sister and I had the job of controlling the flames on the grill with these big slabs of beef. So my interaction with my dad were always around some aspect of something he was doing. He would bring us kids in to be involved in activities that he had, and we liked that. As I got older, I got to learn more about what was going on the inside. But as a kid, that's all I really saw of what he was.
What do you think was going on the inside?
It's really fascinating. My dad was had a similar mind to mine in that he was really inquisitive. He loved questions, but he also was extraordinarily direct, probably too direct. And I think he spent a lot of his life wondering why people were pissed at him. And of course, I knew, but he didn't really want to hear it from me.
Charlie, how are you like him and how are you not?
I'm like him in that I absolutely love inventiveness. I love innovation. I love people that are driven to make things better. People that are looking for new ideas and willing to exert their energies and sacrifice for them. I'm attracted to that to every possible extent. I'm like him in that I love to be generous. I love to give of myself and anything that I can to contribute, particularly if I think that it's going to matter. I am not like him in terms of I hope I don't spend a lot of time worrying about why people are pissed at me, although some folks maybe wish I did. But yeah, I'm a lot more verbal, a lot more extroverted. His thought process is very linear. Mine is a lot more jumpy. It's a lot more intuitive.
Yeah. Charlie, you referenced your father and this great product development story, and I'd love to get to it.
Sure.
And in fact, it's one that is taught as a case study in business school.
I know it. I remember I was in school at college, and somebody brought this book up to me, and they said, "Are you Charlie Elberson, son of Bob Elberson, the marketing genius?" And I went, "Okay." Yeah.
Could you
Sure.
tell us this story that has become a legendary case study?
Well, not only will I tell you the story, I'll give you the inside scoop so you heard it here first. The product development that you're referring to is legs pantyhose. And of course, part of what makes legs pantyhose important is because it changed a lot of things for a lot of businesses at the same time. It was also a reflection of a tremendous cultural shift. So, I mean, it's a marker, pretty much, is why people remember it so clearly. And because I have the inside scoop, I know how it came about. And my dad gets credit for it, as he should, because he asked the question that led to the idea, which if you want to get a common thread of the Elbersons, that's the thread. He asked the question that led to the idea. And when I can achieve that same thing, I know how I feel. And the question was, he had just seen a presentation about how all of these women were coming into the workforce in some professional capacity. And he thought they're very happy because these women are going to need to buy pantyhose, some of which will come from Haynes. The question that he asked, because he knew that the distribution of Haynes was to department stores and ladies' clothing stores, most of which were closed at 6 p.m. on weekdays and would close at about 1 o'clock on Saturdays and not open on Sundays. His question was, it's really great that all of these women are coming into the workforce that are going to be buying our product. But I have a question. And the question is, how are they going to buy it? And silence prevailed. Because it was obvious they couldn't, because the distribution channels where Haynes was available. As a matter of fact, there was no quality pantyhose brand available in a channel that a woman could buy it and work at the same time without really putting herself through a lot of torment.
For our contemporary audience who may not remember how women purchased hosiery before the introduction of legs, maybe you can help set the stage of the contrast of
Sure.
life before and after legs.
Yeah, pantyhose, hosiery of all kinds was available at department stores. It was sold on long racks. It was stretched across a piece of cardboard so that you could see the color. So it was a big flat package. This will come to be important in a minute. And merchandising took up a lot of floor space in these department stores because these racks stretched vertically across the floor so the women could go through it and look at each one and to choose the one that they wanted. These department stores were generally open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., which was the standard at the time. Some of them actually closed at 5 for their convenience, not yours. And they would open on Saturday till some point in the afternoon, maybe 2 o'clock. When women were stay-at-home homemakers, this was convenient because they could go to the department store while they were out going to get groceries and doing things for the home and just make it one of their stops. When they started working and were at their workplace from 8 or 9 till 5, going to the department store was not something they were going to be able to do very easily. So when my father asked and said, how are they going to buy them? He meant it because they, in fact, physically could not get to a retailer that sold the Hanes product or really any quality pantyhose. The only hosiery that you could buy at the time that was available in supermarkets or drugstores or anything that was open till 9 were not very high quality at all. They were off-brand, kind of really junky products, and women didn't want them.
What was the game changer?
Well, the game changer was that came from that question was they had to figure out a way to get their product into places that women could buy their product. And of course, there was no internet. There was no direct sales option. They had to get into the drugstores and supermarkets. The real game changer that they figured out was that to get into the drugstores and supermarkets, there was no hosiery section. They couldn't just insert their product in an existing section. They had to literally buy floor space in these stores. And every square foot was going to cost them. That meant they had to go vertical. So the real game changer and the reason that legs is that. It had to go vertical. It couldn't go horizontal. Everything stems from that. They had to buy 2 square feet of floor space to make the profit margins work out. So they imagined a vertical display that was stacked versus a horizontal display where the cards are stretched out. And that meant they had to change the packaging because the cards wouldn't work vertically. Hosiery is actually manufactured. One of the largest manufacturers of hosiery at the time was in Israel. And most of Hanes hosiery came from Israel. And when it comes out of the machine, it's just a little ball of product. And so they looked at the little ball of product and they said, well, part of what our problem is we have to go stretch it out, and that costs a lot of money, and we paid a lot for the packaging. Is there a way we can package it just like it is? And so they went to a packaging company, the Marlborough packaging company, a guy named Howard Marlborough. He was great. And Howard came up with the egg. And Dancer Fitzgerald sampled the agency for Hanes at the time, took the egg, and it became legs. They designed the tower that the legs were stacked on. They designed the costumes, the uniforms that the women who drove the trucks that stocked the towers. It was a full branding experience from beginning to end to try and get women to not only understand that the pantyhose world had changed, but to love how it was changing. Because not only was it going to be convenient for them, it was fun. It had personality. It wasn't the same old that their mother did. It was their pantyhose that was packaged, marketed, distributed, and sold for them and for their generation.
You think about 3 or 4 or 5 iconic advertising campaigns of the 1970s. Legs has to be among them.
Legs, they'll have you, they'll hold you. They'll never let you go.
Yeah. So you went to Vanderbilt University.
I did.
What was that like for you?
Well, Vanderbilt was terrific because I got to study all sorts of things that were not in my major. But I ended up majoring in economics, which ended up being fortuitous. It was totally by accident. But I ended up majoring in economics, which helped me understand how business actually happens at the micro level. And by that I mean people are making choices. I got to understand choice in terms of how it relates to business, which became really instrumental to everything else.
And from there, you became a madman. You went off to Young and Rubicam in Manhattan.
I did.
And were on Madison Avenue.
I was.
What were those days like?
Well, the great thing about being in Madison Avenue, and I started my first year in advertising was 1980. And if you're not a fan of the Mad Men show, then this won't mean anything to you. But if you were a fan of the Mad Men show, Pete Campbell was my boss. Okay, so by the time I got there, Pete he'd been in the industry for 20 years. He was a VP management supervisor at Young and Rubicam, and I got to work for him. So when I was coming up, Pete Campbell was at the zenith of his long advertising career.
Are we talking about the character, or are we talking about a real person?
Sadly, we're only talking about the character. But yeah, those guys were my guys. Those guys were my bosses. Mm-hmm. And they would tell stories. And I'm here to tell you that the stories in Mad Men, absent all of the soap opera stuff, I don't know who slept with who. I'm just saying, I'm going to own that right now. All the stories about the client stuff, they're all true. Now, I'm sure they were exaggerated for dramatic entertainment and clarity, but that Lucky Strike story that opens in the show in the pilot, true story. It actually happened just the way they depicted it, because it was still a legend when I was there, because Pete Campbell and the Pete Campbell ilk were my bosses. So when I came in, it was the sunsetting of the real Mad Men era, because those guys were on their way out.
Did you take naps in the middle of the afternoon?
No, but we did drink. We drank a lot. And but yeah, it was the 80s. So the hair got spiked, the ties got skinnier. There were illicit drugs in the media department versus just creative.
And you did work on some iconic campaigns.
I did.
In addition to the Peanuts campaign for MetLife, you also worked for the Prego spaghetti sauce for RJR Nabisco.
True. I introduced Prego spaghetti sauce, and it was that was really my first big brand, and it wasn't big at the time. It was it was the first new product that Campbell Soup had introduced in 10 years, and they were such a conservative company. They went very slow. It was clear they had a winner on their hands, but they took it very slow. But I think the important thing I learned about Prego spaghetti sauce is the importance of changing it up now and then. I will tell you honestly that if you think about nothing but spaghetti sauce for 6 months, at the end of the 6 months, you will have thought all the great ideas about spaghetti sauce you're ever going to think, Mark.
To this day.
To this day, I have not had another good idea about spaghetti sauce since fall of 1980.
So here you are, a young ad executive in New York in the early 80s, working for a major iconic firm. Did you anticipate that would be your career?
I didn't think in career terms. It was, I spent the first, every day of the first 2 years I expected to get fired, like every young person should feel. And it was so motivating. And I had to learn, and I had to move quick. But I did learn that I wasn't going to get bored. I did learn that I really liked the diversity of people and the minds that I got to interact with. I actually learned that the challenges that clients represent, as sometimes painful as they can be, are really good challenges in terms of problem solving, because it's not necessarily solving the problem that's laid before you.
How long were you at Y&R?
Well, I was in New York a total of 7 years at just 2 agencies. Y&R was my last one.
There came a time when you decided to start a firm of your own.
I did. I had moved back to North Carolina, where I'm from. I got recruited down here in the late 80s, which was a great time to leave New York and come to North Carolina. And the agency I was working for wanted to grow their operation in Charlotte, so they moved me down here, and we did. And then we spun that off, and I formed my own agency, and I had that for 12 years. And then I folded that agency into the agency I'm in now. And that was, 10 years ago at least, 12.
Charlie, we've had a digital revolution in the last few years. It's disrupted so many different industries. How has it changed the business of marketing communications?
I can say very sincerely that I've been waiting my whole career for this.
Why?
Because we're dancing so much closer now. When I first started, I'll use Prego spaghetti sauce. I could read a lot about spaghetti sauce. I knew exactly how it was made. I knew everything about the product because that was easy to get. I knew a little bit about how consumers enjoyed it. I learned a little bit about what they thought. We could do some research. I could learn a little bit about what they watched and how they responded when we dropped a coupon. But we were so far apart. We weren't even touching dancing. We were so far apart from our consumer, which makes it hard to come up with meaningful and relevant ways to engage in that relationship I was talking about. To have a relationship with an individual, you have to be close. There has to be some degree of intimacy.
You have to dance.
You have to dance. You have to exchange. You have to interact. And we would try to find ways to interact with our very poor tools. We would put little techniques in the tools so we know when and how you responded to whatever thing we wanted you to respond to. But it was so primitive. That was then. Now it's almost the opposite problem. We have too many ways to interact with a consumer. So now we have to choose the ones that are actually the most meaningful and the ones that matter, which is a whole other kettle of fish, but this one is so much more fun.
Mm-hmm. What are the challenges that the digital revolution presents to firms like yours when any person out there in the world can think of themselves as a marketer and have all the tools available to them?
Everyone always has been a marketer. It's just that now that that some aspect of the tools are indeed, as you said, available to everyone. It's a little bit like before there was Home Depot. You couldn't really. It was hard to get a full assortment of tools to make you believe you could build a house. You can go to Home Depot, spend $25, and believe I'm ready to build a house. Same is true now. The tools, the instruments are available to everyone. And we've kind of been living in this state for at least 10 years where everyone can self-publish and we can create a podcast and we can do things and put it out there. And that is a bit of a distraction because it can lead to a lot of wasted effort. It's great because it makes the resource available to everyone, but without any form of scarcity, it can be very inefficient.
Does it devalue what you do?
It can seem to, particularly initially. When anyone can produce, the means of production aren't as valuable. What we have done as an industry is move back from positioning ourselves as the means to produce. If everyone can produce, I don't want to be standing in a place where I'm just another means to produce. So producing ads and placing ads is less and less and less of every viable agency's business model now. It's so much more about engagement, which is not something that's available and easy to produce for everyone.
What do you mean by engagement?
The relationship, the involvement, and then
the insight.
Well, the insight, the involvement, the being close, the knowing the knowing how to say what, when, and to whom in ways that they will respond and act in the way that you need and want them to, and then to know whether it's happening or not.
So that is your value proposition.
That's my value proposition. To make sure that the actions that my clients are doing are ones that matter, are ones that are meaningful, are ones that are going to eventually lead to what their goal is.
What trends do you see?
A lot of trends these days are in measurement, are in metrics. We're seeing a real revolution in measurement because there's so many metrics. There's no absence of numbers to know what happened. What's the problem is that there are too many metrics, and some of them really don't matter. A lot of the metrics that are very easy for people to get, Google Analytics, for example, aren't really instrumental in terms of leading to a goal, but they're easy to get. Numbers are so powerful that an individual or an organization will chase a metric that doesn't really matter only because they have the metric. So part of it becomes discerning what measurement is really going to matter to what we're doing and then going out and getting it.
Charlie, which agencies will succeed?
I think the agencies that are going to succeed are the ones that recognize the dance, honestly. The ones that recognize that our value proposition lives in that place of truth, that lives in the place of the relationship and the dance between our clients and their customers, and our role in that dance. And the ones that think it's about ads or think it's about products or think it's about anything but that dance.
Charlie, in 2005, you and your dad created something together.
Yep.
What did you create?
We created what was eventually became known as venture philanthropy. He thought he invented it. He didn't. But it's just an approach to philanthropy where we're trying to stimulate new ideas, to incentivize nonprofit organizations to think differently and to take on new initiatives, to be a little bit more open to risk and lean experimentation, to try new things and see what happens. And then finally to measure the impact of what they're doing, which seems like pretty straightforward business propositions, but they're relatively new thinking in the nonprofit and the human services sectors. So this has been really transformative now.
Charlie, I'd like for you to read something that describes that fund.
Sure. So the purpose of the Reemprise Fund is to fund new initiatives, high potential and even outlandish ideas that have the prospect of creating amazing community impacts and unforeseen proportions.
So that's quite a legacy of your dad's.
Yeah.
And you get to continue his insights, his work.
Well, we've made 185 grants as of April, so supported close to 100 different nonprofit organizations. So dozens and dozens and dozens of new ideas and initiatives, some of which have succeeded wildly, some of which have failed miserably, some have kind of hit it down the middle for a little bit. But all of them have been potentially game-changing. All of them have been very creative and innovative in their thinking. All of them have been very well planned, and all of them have been measured.
That's got to be very gratifying for you.
Well, it is, because I get to use the 35 years of training that advertising gave me in some fascinating ways that are ultimately really important for everyone, you and me, and everyone in our community.
Maybe a lot of folks don't know this about you, but you're in a band.
I am. I've been in band since I was 13 years old. I've been doing that longer than any of this.
Tell us about the band, the music that you play, Small Time Joe.
The band I'm in is called Small Time Joe. I play keyboard and sing. Like I said, I've been doing it a long time. People say, what kind of music do you play? And I answer, wisecrackingly good music. Thank you. It's a lot of classic rock. It's also, we have a few songs from the 21st century that we like.
Does playing music help you with your advertising work?
It does, because I get to, one is I get to not be anything but a piano player for a couple hours on a night. But the greatest thing about being in a band is you have to hear, you have to be really attuned to each other if it's going to work. You have to be so close and so intimate with these other individuals that you can react and respond almost without knowing how and why.
And what could be better than playing Love Shack?
Exactly. Love Shack demands no less.
Charlie, when you look back on your life one day, what do you want it to have been about?
Well, I use the phrase live from the heart a lot, which is something I've had to grow into. I want to try and live that way. I want to live from the heart. I want to give. I want to contribute. I want to have made a contribution. I want to be active in that. I really want to pour myself into everything I do. And I think if that can be done, then it's been a good life.
Thanks for your time, Charlie.
Thanks, Mark. This is fun.
Charlie Elberson is Vice President Insights Strategist for Wray Ward Creative Marketing Communications. Charlie previously led his own agency, Elberson Partners. He has worked for Young and Rubicam and Leber Partners. He is a graduate of Vanderbilt University. And now, a personal word. When Charlie Elberson talks about asking the questions that lead to insight and living from the heart, he is describing the stated purpose of this podcast: to inspire a more insightful and humane world. Well, how do we do that? How does this podcast fulfill such a lofty purpose? The same way a great marketing campaign based on what is true fulfills its purpose, by resonating in hearts and minds. What is true is what resonates. The truth can be brilliant and uplifting. It can also be dark and anxiety-ridden. The truth is the light and shadows of our nature. This podcast explores the lives and work of our guests. The exploration reveals the complexity of the human condition. When we hear our guests talk, we are reminded of what is most important to us and what it means to live. I study and express the humanities. I do it professionally as a teacher and as a private citizen. I am a humanist. The humanities ask the question, what does being human mean? It seeks the truth of being human. The humanities, history, philosophy, religion, language, literature, the arts, record our answers to that question. Answers that are always true in revealing something about ourselves. My love for the humanities was planted early in life as I listened to my dad tell stories of 19th century Jewish merchants who emigrated to the Amazon jungle. The love was tended by public school teachers in New York who read T.S. Eliot, and Catholic nuns in Rio de Janeiro who played the music of the Beatles on acoustic guitar. The love flowered in college as I read Fitzgerald and Bonhoeffer. The humanities ask why we are here and what to make of pride and despair. The humanities glorify and challenge our earthly vanities, as the skull of poor Yorick did to Hamlet. The humanities howl at angel-headed hipsters who burn for ancient heavenly connections to the starry dynamos of the night. And they give hope to skywalking heroes who fly into the depth of Death Stars. The humanities initiate us into the wisdom of the tribe and impart the skills we need to hunt and gather. In reading Homer, in considering Hume and Schopenhauer, in listening to Mozart and McCartney, we play in light and shadow. We swim in gray seas and scale blooming taxonomies of learning. We are imparted shamanistic powers to think critically and to persuade spirits loose in the world. The humanities connect us to all those who have come before us and to all those who will come after us. Just as Charlie Elberson does in his work, we connect to the ages when we excavate and clarify what is true. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Thank you to my partners Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value. Visit us also on our website, onlifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.